Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the band with Kaleidoscope Ears. And as usual, James, you're sporting a very cool Revolver t-shirt, BTW. Yeah, nice. So you must be feeling like you must be having a good day today. Especially, you must be excited about the podcast.
Yeah.
How are you feeling?
I feel something that starts with F. I feel fantastic. No. I feel fabulous. No. I feel fucking great. No. I feel what word am I looking for?
Flange. You feel flange.
Sure.
Yeah, so yeah, exactly. What we're doing today is I feel flange. So let's
let's do it.
All right. Well, in our usual tradition, maybe you could kind of give us a little background of the era and what was going on with the Beatles around this time.
All right. So this was recorded 18th of October, 1964. And as people may or may not know, they were about heading back into the studio for Rubber Soul around that time. But, of course, before the album, they've got to release a new single. They've always got to release a new single. So the way that I recall this story being told, and I believe I don't know if I got this from Anthology or where I got it from, but the story that I was familiar with, 8 days a week. They had written that because they needed a single. So, like, okay, let's write a #1 hit. And it was a jobby job kind of song that they weren't excited about because it was just cookie cutter to them. It, of course, as you know, as an American, went on to be a #1 hit in America and is one of their big hits in the American audience anyway. But they were actually almost embarrassed by it. It's just, that's kind of yesterday's sound. And the way that I remember hearing this story, and I don't remember where I heard it, but when John came up with this lick and they started putting this song together, he's like, this is the new sound. Yay. Now we've got something. And so they were proud to release this as an A-side. And of course, it was, I believe, their 8th straight #1 single. So
not bad.
Incredible. Now, okay, so there's not a lot with regards to the production or what have you, but, of course, one of the things that sticks out from the song, something that John was always very proud of, was the first ever feedback on a record. Of course, he said, everyone was doing it live and everyone was incorporating that sound, but we were the first to get it on a record, unless you go back to some 1922 blues recording or something, he said. But... okay, so the way that I'm sure Paul tells it in the anthology is that they were just putting down their guitars to go listen to a take, and the A string rung, and then there was feedback, and they were like, "Oh, can we get that on the tape?" But interestingly, I was just looking this up on the Beatles Bible, and at least this person in the Beatles Bible is suggesting that story is actually kind of a cover story, because the use of feedback was specifically prohibited by Parlophone. They had strict recording policies, no feedback on the record. So they passed it off as like, it was just kind of an accident, and we decided to keep it kind of thing. But apparently, from take one, it was always incorporated in the song. The feedback was always how it was going to open. So, again, I didn't even know that until I started researching that for this podcast. Other than that, I did look at Revolution in the Head, and it's there's not a heck of a lot to talk about with regards to this. He obviously mentions the feedback. He recorded in 9 takes. I Feel Fine, far from a brand new number, sounds like something the group had been playing for years. The lack of a conventional rhythm guitar opens the sound out, allowing the syncopations in the riff to spark and jump. Responding to this, Starr turns in a buoyant performance, playing Aladdin style on the ride cymbal with conga accents on the high tom-tom. Considering that it's mostly his energy that lifts the track, for instance coming out of the middle eights, it's unfortunate that the production parks him far left in the stereo spectrum rather than in the middle. Harrison's 4-bar guitar break similarly distills the overall feel of the track, not so much a solo as a pithy summary of the bluesy mood and form. And he goes on to note that apparently, because stereo was still kind of a new thing, they had to basically mix it for monophonic in mind, and I guess that's why there was, as famously in those early Beatles stereo mixes, the the panning is just crazy on them, this being no exception. But that's about all I have.
Well, you know what, regards that, I do highly recommend the 2015 remaster of the song. I listened to it in headphones, and it's much, much better. It really is very well done. And by the way, also regarding the feedback, George's snarky comment was, yeah, well, we invented Jimi Hendrix pretty much.
Sure, George.
So yeah, interesting stuff. I have a lot to say about two aspects. Well, the most salient jump out at you aspects of the song are the opening feedback and the lick itself. After that, there's not a whole hell of a lot to, write home about. But I have a lot to say about both things. First of all, just let's always remember that the Beatles had tremendous introductions to songs, and they always kept up with keeping like a unique, ingenious way of getting a song started. So,
sorry, just not to shortchange 8 Days a Week. Even the fade in, fade out for 8 Days a Week was kind of new and different.
It was new, and the lick is. The lick is cool. It's like it's definitely a memorable opening lick for a song. I like the fact that it's a totally different song I'm talking about here. But when you move,
sorry to get us off track.
When you move the D shape up, they're just moving the D shape up in 3 different positions, right? But on the second one, you get the 7th in the bass of the chord, and that's always an effect. It was big with jazz fusion artists in the 70s, putting the 7th in the bass like that. So, but let's get back to I Feel Flange.
The Beatles invented Earth, Wind, and Fire. Anyway.
All right, so speaking about the ingenuity of their intros, some notable intros the Beatles gave us. If I Fell, very early on in their career, but that's a wonderful introduction to a song. It's not hard rocking, but it's wonderful. In My Life is another beautiful. Hard Day's Night, the iconic, which is very connected for some reason with this intro somehow to me. It's like that one, because it's one note. In this case, in the Hard Day's Night, it's one chord, but in this song, it's one note. But I'm going to talk about something you'll never be able to unhear. It's actually not one note, and I'm going to explain that later on. Interesting. But yeah, 8 Days a Week was on my list of notable introductions. You Can't Do That. Day Tripper. Ticket to Ride. All these wonderful, and there's a million more. That's the thing.
For the younger crowd, like people like myself, young cats in the audience, may not be able to appreciate that standard, that it seems like such a standard form now, opening with the little lick that then repeats throughout the song. But that was still a new thing when they were doing it. That was not a typical way to open a song. So.
In fact, I read somewhere, I think it was the Beatles Bible or one of these Beatles websites, that John became kind of, I wouldn't use the word obsessed, but he was really becoming very into this idea of coming up with a cool lick for an introduction for a song.
Yep.
Which is unusual when you think about it, because you're the one that made the astute observation that John songs tend to just jump in, like there's no intro, you know? So, yeah.
Maybe that's it. Either, he doesn't want to bother with it, or he'll overwrite it. I really gotta come up with something if I'm gonna come up with
it. Yeah. Well, I Want You starts with that awesome bridge, which I think is great, displacing it at the very beginning and then leaving it for later. So very cool that one there. So let me just go into the feedback thing. This is really fascinating to me. First of all, my notes here are saying it was 12 days before the actual recording that John, with Paul, discovered the feedback. And I'm really emphasizing this with Paul thing, and you'll find out why soon. In a sense, what I'm saying here is that it was Paul that initiated it. Huh? All right, let me explain. This is what I discovered listening to this in headphones, and I listened to 2 different tracks of this, recordings, not live performances, recordings. There's another one they did for the BBC, so-called live. It wasn't live. They actually did a pre-recording of the song, and I heard the same phenomenon in both. So here we go. If you listen in headphones, you can hear what sounds like Paul's bass hitting the open A string in the left can, right? Then what it does is it pans over. Now they're playing with stereo. It pans over to the right side, and as it reaches the right side, you hear the... But here's the thing, and this is the thing I wanted to look into, and this is something I believe that no one on the internet has ever said, is that you can hear Paul's bass sustaining as John's guitar is feeding back. Now, what does that have to do with the price of beans here? Well, what I read, what really happened was John leaned his guitar in the amp, but Paul hit a bass note on the A string, and through the phenomenon of sympathetic vibration, which is a magical effect in music, his A string began to respond to Paul's A note. All it needs to do is vibrate just a little bit, and then the feedback effect begins to happen. Because what happens is the sound comes out of the speakers, even if it's a tiny little amount of sound. This is why feedback builds up the way it does. A tiny little amount of sound, right, gets picked up by the pickups and sent back into the amp, and then it begins to build and build and build, right? So what I'm saying here is that it's not one note, it's 2 notes. One is Paul's bass and the other is John's guitar, right? And it's the bass guitar that actually initiates the feedback. Now, you will see like live performances of John taking his guitar and bringing it up to the amp, and Paul isn't hitting a note. Granted, you can do that, you know. You do that by just hitting the string and bringing it closer in that case.
Yeah. Just so there's no confusion, this is the official story of it. The track opens with a sustained low A on bass as a foundation for feedback from Lennon's Rickenbacker. Obtained by
there you
striking
go.
the note with the volume switched down and then turning up while pointing the pickup towards the amp.
Ah, okay, there it is. Okay, so that it's not one note; it's actually 2 notes, Paul's A and the response from John's guitar. Of course, they probably couldn't do that live, but I read for the BBC thing, they had it really work on getting that feedback thing. But you can hear it again. Paul struck the bass. The only difference is you don't hear the panning effect, but you can hear the bass sustaining, and then the feedback comes in. So I thought that was a curious little bit, you know. So maybe I'm not the only guy on the internet that observed this, but it was a really real eye opener for me. It was really cool. So yeah, wow, that's all. Oh wait, here's another interesting bit. I found this fascinating as well, and I'm going to give you a little pop quiz at the end of this music theory quiz. Okay. Initially, since the feedback was an A note, John thought to play the song in the key of A. The song is in G.
Right.
But, right, it would make sense, right? You got an A note ring, you're going to do the song in A.
Yeah.
But the problem was it was too high for John. So he took it down a whole step to the key of G, right? And you notice it works seamlessly. It doesn't sound like 2 different keys or anything. Okay, now, here's your pop quiz. Why does it work seamlessly? And I'll give you a big hint, all right, is that the first chord is a D7.
Okay.
Picture that piano in your head.
D7, D, F sharp, A.
A, boom. Right. It's the 5th of the D7.
Because A is in the key of G, right?
Yeah,
absolutely
it
is. In the key of G, so.
Right, but the effect would have been different if they did that, right, to the G chord.
Yeah.
Works perfectly on D, though.
Yeah.
And who knows? Maybe the lick was modified in that moment to accommodate that. Like, you know, maybe someone said, well, start on the D7 first, and then, you know. I don't think that's the way it went, but, you know, still, possibility.
I should complete
George
that. The F sharp AC for D7. I
D
didn't
F
say
sharp
the C.
AC.
Yeah.
Right. Very good. All right. So that's all, the little bit about the feedback. I don't think there's much else to say about it. Everybody in the world knows about the feedback. It's just iconic. It's just so Beatles, It just says Beatles, like so many of their intro licks. And speaking of licks, this one was inspired by Bobby Parker's song, Watch Your Step. And if you could, I think, cue it up so people can hear the influence.
Even the same, it sounds almost like the same drum fill to bring it in.
Yeah. So, that kind of speaks to the Beatles' real honest-to-goodness interest in American black music and how they loved American soul and R&B and rock, rock and roll, actually. Speaking of that homage to American black music, here's an apt little segue. And this is regarding Ray Charles' song, What Did I Say? All right. This is a lick that's also based on a dominant seventh chord like I Feel Fine, okay? But not only that, is that Ringo designed his drum part to imitate the drums in What Did I Say? So let's give a listen to the intro of that song. Right?
Yep.
You can hear it.
Definitely. In fact, I can hear a lot of early Beatles in that.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah, very much so. I want to talk about the Ray Charles lick in a moment, but what was I going to say? I don't remember now. I remember when I was a little boy and I had just got my first electric guitar, and of course I was listening to the Beatles. The way it was when I was a kid is that you walk down a suburban street and there's a band practicing in every other garage. It was like that. It was amazing. Like everybody, wanted to be as good as the Beatles and wanted to be a musician. It was a wonderful thing. And I remember hearing a guitar player playing. It wasn't quite the Ray Charles, but it was very close. And when I heard it, I'm like, that is the coolest lick ever. This is prior to Day Tripper and all that. But I loved the lick. I thought it was the coolest thing you could do on a guitar. So, it brings back a lot of memories for me to hear that lick. Anyway.
And the drumming is clearly what Ringo was aping, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Definitely like a faux Latin style drum. On the tom, that boom boom is a very, very Latin thing to do. It's like tradition. So, yeah. In fact, I'm sure Ray had that in mind when he wrote the song. He probably said to the drummer, I want a classic Latin beat to this. Oh, what I wanted to mention was we just played 2 copyright songs, so if I get a strike and it gets muted, which may happen, I'm gonna save the original video and bring it over to Odysee. And if you really want to hear those quotes, you'll be able to hear it there. Which means Odysee immediately imports your videos, so I'll have to delete the video they imported and re-upload mine.
Who knows? But, maybe the copyright gods will allow 4 seconds of music.
Well, I heard that they won't even allow. I was scouring the internet for what are the rules, and basically it doesn't matter. It could be a microsecond, and they won't allow it. You'd think under 10 seconds would be okay,
For the purposes of education? No, of course not.
No. Anyway, most of the Beatles, what I call power licks, the hard rockin' licks, are based off of dominant seventh chords. Here's a list. I wrote down off the top of my head: Paperback Writer, Day Tripper, You Can't Do That, Drive My Car, Run for Your Life, If I Needed Someone, Taxman, Dr. Robert, and on and on and on and on. I want to tell you Sgt. Pepper's and Sgt. Pepper's Reprise, Back in the USSR, Savoy Truffle, One After 909. Now, why is this so? Why is the dominant seventh chord the primary kind of chord that rock and roll was using in those days? All right. You have any clue on that question? Like what might be the answer to that?
I'm going to guess this is related to the blues sliding scale.
Well, not the sliding scale, but the blues in general.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Well, we'll hit the sliding scale when we talk about George's solo. Well, because that is relevant.
Okay.
Also, we'll talk about that. Yeah. All right. So, James, in your guitar lessons, I've spoken about this a lot. In my system of teaching, there are three approaches to musical analysis that are separate systems. One is the Greek modes, which is a non-fixed root system, meaning that if I take a major scale, any of the notes of the scale can become a root. Then we have the major minor key system, which is a fixed root system. That means if I'm in the key of C, the only root in the key of C is C. That's it. And one thing I recently discovered in the Decatonic model is that in the blues, you might say it's also a fixed root system, but here's the thing about it. The fixed root can be dominant seven, it could be major, or it could be minor. All three can be a root, but it's like if you're an A, that's the only root chord you could get out of the entire array of the Decatonic model, which has 6 major chords. All right. So in connection with that, another thing, and in fact, I've mentioned this before in these podcasts, but one impetus that spurred me on to start making the early videos I was making was to kind of impress the listener the idea that the Beatles drew from European chord progressions and American chord progressions. Now, I had a big argument online, which is always no fun, with a keyboard player when I mentioned that there's a distinction within jazz itself between European harmony and blues harmony. All right. He felt that jazz didn't use European harmony. All right. But the thing about European harmony is that it has specific linear rules to follow. And if you're doing jazz, as jazz as that may sound, it's still using European rules. So the formation of the chords, how the chords move to each other, everything about it is based on, you build a chord this way and chords move that way and they're connected through blah, 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 right? All the rules that make up music theory. Blues is different. Blues is, first of all, it's not a linear theory. When you take what I call the blues decatonic model, you can't think of it in a linear way like this is a scale. It's almost like you have to pluck things out of this model, this 10-note model. You have to pluck things out of it and put it together and make something. So it's a different kind of theory altogether because it's not talking about this chord should move to that chord or that chord should be built that way. Yes, you use European thinking to build the chords, no question about it. But the very fact that this is a resolution in the blues, all right, that very fact completely breaks all the European rules. If I start with a G major chord, the European resolution would be, but the American blues resolution is, And jazz musicians, they make the most use of the blues. They do it intuitively. There's no theory behind it. I've had discussions with jazz musicians, and they concur. There is no music theory for the blues until I came along, right? So I say that when you listen to a jazz tune, you can listen to a jazz tune where there's not a bit of American harmony in it. All right, it's all European style, chord building, movement, everything. The fact that they extend the chords a la jazz, I mean, hell, Ravel used a string of ninth chords in parallel motion in his Pavane for a Dead Princess piece. So they were already fattening up chords. They knew how to do that. But the thing was, these European composers were listening to American blues. They were trying to get a sound out of it. And it's very interesting when you look at and listen to the Ebony Concerto from Stravinsky. It's really cool to listen to this and how he's kind of, through European ears, kind of reinterpreting American blues in a very strange, way, especially for that era, because everything was kind of avant-garde-ish in those days. So, yeah. So regarding the lick, it is not an easy lick to play. I've seen John play this live on acoustic guitar, and it's really hard on acoustic, like super hard on acoustic. It's hard on electric. And now I'm not going to teach how to play that, because I'm not here to give guitar lessons for these podcasts. What I will do is direct you to Mike Pacelli, his lesson on I Feel Fine. And if, people want to learn how to pick that up, they can do it. I will say with this one proviso, I love Mike's work, and I'm not dissing him in any way at all, but he did miss a note. The way he did it and the way I used to do it years ago was... how did I do it? Now, there's a missing note in there. Here's the wrong way, the way I've been doing it. And here's the right way. There's an extra bass note right there. Without it, it's... But it's...
Yeah.
You can hear it.
Yeah.
And that takes a little bit of coordination to do that. He was a pretty good picker. He really was. That's not easy. However, when you listen to it, almost every time it's done slightly differently.
Yeah.
And it's a little sloppy. And,
Yeah. I'd forgive that live for sure, especially on an acoustic. That's incredible.
Oh yeah, especially on an acoustic. Absolutely. I've tried to play it on an acoustic. Your pinky will freeze up because you have to, when you're down here, you have to stretch it over to the 7th fret while maintaining the G7 shape. That's painful, man. That's what I call finger yoga on guitar, And by the way, some of the lore is when they first started recording, the first few days into it, John could not do the lick and sing the song. It took a lot for him to learn how to do it, but he eventually got it. They did it live, So
yeah.
Anyway, I will direct you to Mike Pacelli. He doesn't do it exactly the right way, misses that bass note, but it's barely noticeable, right? In fact, that's what I do. That's where the low bass note would have been, as opposed to... Right? Mm-hmm. Actually, I kind of like my way better now. But whatever. It's a great lick. It's an awesome, brilliant, classic Lennon, just surprising you with his intelligence and creativity. Just brilliant lick. All right, so let's talk about the song in general. It's got a basic structure. You have your intro, then an A section, a B section. A section is B, a B, B. And B is good to me, you know. She's happy as can be, you know. She said so. I'm in love with her and I feel fine. So we get another one of those. That's the A section. And I'm so glad that she... have you ever watched the official video of that?
Yes, but it's been a while. Yeah.
I love the way they play on this. It was actually, I decided to look up what was going on with these early videos that they did. Mm. And apparently they were booked at Twickenham to do 5 of these videos, mm-hmm. or 4 of these videos for new songs. Mm-hmm. And the strange thing was, I Feel Fine was included in there, even though it was already a year old.
Mm, right.
Very interesting.
Was this the same one where they were doing like from Help?
Help, and with there are all sorts of weird scenarios like
like,
one is where they're all sitting like one in front of the other, and they're trying to get attention.
Exactly. Like silly, stupid little gags with little cheap sets around them. I like We Can Work It Out because you could see like at one point the camera pans over to a picture of a funny picture of someone's funny face, you know. Right.
And trying to keep the Beatles smiling while they're doing their video.
Yeah.
They didn't need that, though. They were so high at that point.
Yeah.
All right, so we have A. B is, I'm so glad that she's mine. And the reason I brought up the video is because John mocks, like, the cutesy, teeny bopper quality of that lyric. I'm so glad that she's my little girl. And he makes this little... face, you know. It's wonderful. It's really wonderful the way they clowned around on those.
But there is definitely a change in vibe and mood in that B section. Is that related to the switch from American harmony to European harmony?
Thank you. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is European harmony. Granted, it's a 50s style. But it's European harmony all the way, as opposed to, right?
And even if you don't know that, if you don't know what's happening, you can feel it. It's just it's a different section, for sure.
Yeah. The blues had this coolness, like the 7th chord, like these black musicians discovered how cool the 7th chord could be. And when I talk about these 3 systems, the role of the 7th chord changed dramatically throughout these systems. In the Greek modes, the only thing a 7th chord could do is, In the major minor key system, it could go, that was new. That was a new resolution for that era. And it could also... That's from the melodic minor scale. You have a 7th chord at the 4th step. So now we have more complicated usage of the 7th chord. What that did was it brought in what are called secondary dominant chords. Right, so that couldn't have happened without the development of the major minor key system. So composers were happy. There was a lot you could do with these new 7ths. But now the blues comes along. And I'm just going to sit on this chord. I'm going to treat it like a root. To hell with everybody else, right? And not only that, but I'm going to resolve from a 4 to a 1 using both 7th chords. Awesome. But I swear, the moments that this was discovered, they must have gone, oh, that sounds so cool. That sounds so cool, Yeah. So now, groundbreaking, and this is why I wrote a theory of the blues. I came up with the blues is, how does this work? I've been taught all this time the 7th chord is supposed to resolve. It can't be the resolve to home chord, the root chord, So it's just a fascinating thing that happened, and blues came along and said you could do this.
Can we plug your parallel relative switch series now for people who haven't seen it?
Yeah, well, that's I've been kind of peppering this talk with references to my theory. But yeah, I have a theory called the parallel relative switch, which includes a new idea of note configurations, not a scale and not just a clump of notes or anything like that, but what's called a model. And what I did was I blended two keys together, two major keys. And if very, very, very quickly to describe how it works is that just if I take the minor pentatonic, the first two notes, this note B flat is minor in relation to G. It's part of the G minor chord, right? And I decided to think, well, the key of B flat is minor in relation to the key of G major. I blended those two keys together, and I came up with incredible revelations about the blues. I don't think it's a complete system yet, but it's very deep as it is right now, and I'm sure a lot of people could, if you know, guys that are heavy into theory will discover new things through that system. So yeah, I have a series on my YouTube channel called the Parallel Relative Switch, which talks about this. The most salient thing is it just has to do with the blue note. That's all it has to do with. Just that. These two notes change the world. All right, anyway, speaking of, or we'll get to the solo. So we have a basic AABA structure. And, well, it's more like AAB, AAB. Well, it's not like that. It's Anyway, when we get to the next A, it's fine. There's one more A that comes up, and that's where the guitar solo is. Now, I call it a C section because it departs from, it's got elements of the song, but it kind of departs from it too, in the sense that the first first 4 bars, 2-bar iteration of the lick on the D7. So when you come out of the solo, which I'll talk about in a moment, that's a 2-bar moment, and then they officially, in earnest, start the opening intro. So let me play it again with the full. And now we're back into the final verse. And where the final verse deviates a little bit, when we got, I'm in love with her and I feel fine. Repeats it, I'm in love with her and I feel fine. And then the classic fade out on the lick. You know, one thing I noticed about this is the Beatles' awareness of being concise and keeping a song around the 2-minute mark if they can. And if I had written the song, I would have done, I'm in love with her and I feel fine. I would have done that 3 times and not 2, because 3 is kind of the magic number. But, you know, it works, and it cuts out the fat.
It sure does.
You know.
Okay, so talk about the solo and the sliding scale.
Okay, now this is, all right, so the solo, you'll notice, goes from... against a G7, right? This sound is from the minor pentatonic. And this sounds major, right? So this kind of refers to my theory, parallel relative switch, this idea that the blues plays between major and minor, okay? And what I'm about to suggest is that a piece of the minor sliding pentatonic is found here. Now I'm going to climb all the way up there in the minor sliding pentatonic. There it is. I could go further, but that's a piece of it. Now, if I do the major sliding pentatonic, I get... That's where you get the second phrase. Now, George wasn't thinking this. He's going by pure instinct, right? So here we have a piece of the minor sliding. Here we have a piece of the major sliding. Back to the minor, and continue on the minor, sliding down like you would on a sliding pentatonic scale. So that's that. It's, again, the interplay between major and minor using the same root, G. That's the real important thing. That's blues. That's blues. When I teach the pentatonic scales to my students, there are 5 different positions in which to play them. I'm sure you know all these, James, by now, right?
Off by heart.
And I tell people, these are all I did was what you'd call the G minor pentatonic. The pentatonic is 2 roots, so it's both major and minor, but let's call it G minor for the moment. And I tell them, it's something I call neighborhood playing, where I'll give them an assignment to find, with all 5 minor shapes, to find the major shape in the same area. So here's G minor, and here's G major. Right? That may not sound like much, but when you blend the 2, you start getting blues. That's mixing the 2 notes from both, right? So, I mean, I could go on and on. This is G minor over here. So how do I get G major? G minor here. And G major here. So you notice I'm not jumping around to get. I could have gone like, this is, if I rely solely on this one shape, right? Here's G minor, here's G major. So you don't want to do that, right? Right? So yeah, that's the reason for neighborhood playing. Find it where you are. Find that scale where you are. So that's one of the salient things I teach. So yeah, that about the solo. Now, there's harmonies show up on the bridge, right? And what's interesting to me is that John is sandwiched between Paul on top, which Paul is always taking the upper, and George is below John. You know, when I thought of that word sandwich, I started to think about how, like, when Nicole Wither, when they were in the van and the windshield broke and they had to, like, lay on top of each other.
Beatles sandwich,
Yeah, they were sandwiched. So what we have is the chord progression G, B minor, C, D, G, B minor, C, D. And John's part is right. Paul's part is yeah, I think that's it. Right? George's part is I don't know what George's part. Yeah, that's George's part. So you get I can't put them all together, but you get the idea. Yeah. Oh, that's right. They'd go ooh, right, as na na ooh. So yeah, that's something like that. Wait, let me get this right. All right, what I want you to listen for, though, is this. That's obviously not thirds or sixths. That's a fifth. It's hollow sounding. And again, this is what I stress, that the Beatles were very, very aware of the chord they were on when they were harmonizing. That is not always the case with harmonizing groups like Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young didn't quite do it the way the Beatles did. It was actually a very unusual sound for the time when they were harmonizing the way they were, because you expect everything to be in thirds, to be sing-songy. But they were not afraid to use those fifths and fourths to get a different effect in there. I did a crappy job of really expressing what goes on the vocals, but I'll put a link to Galeazzo Frudua, who does the Beatles vocals breakdown of I Feel Fine. I'll put a link to that. Now, just one more thing I want to mention is that the lyric, which is pretty banal, right? There's nothing much here, right? It's just cute pop. I mean, that's why John was mocking himself in the video. But here's what I think about it. First of all, this song, I feel fine. I feel good. Like I'm really doing good. I'm flanging, baby, right? But, all right, so this is coming from the guy that wrote Misery and Babies in Black. Interesting, right? I'm a loser, right? Like soul-bearing kind of stuff, or at least dark, right? So now, here's a guy that went to art school, and I'm sure they were taught that, I mean, John, after he left the Beatles, kept talking about how great geniuses suffer. And, oh, by the way, I'm suffering,
Just as an aside, make of it what you will.
Don't put two and two together. So, in other words, I think he kind of, even in his early days, he was very aware of this idea that the artist suffers and he's in pain. So he must have been a little bit embarrassed of the song. And even just embarrassed to say, I feel good. I'm feeling good, right? Yeah. In fact, he might have gotten...
It's more of a Paul sentiment, isn't it? Like, I would expect Paul to write this.
Right, exactly, yeah, totally. The bright and sunny outlook thing. Now, it could be Paul's influence, Maybe John was impressed by a Happy Paul song and thought, I should try to write one. Yeah. Another thing is, though, you think about blues and blues influence, most blues artists, write songs about, my dog bit my leg and my woman left me,
Or my wife bit my leg and my dog left me, either way.
Yeah. Right. But, that's not all there is to the blues. I mean, there are happy lyrics in blues. There are, like, positive lyrics in blues. So John might have heard a blues song that, like, took that twist and was influenced. Well, you can do that. Maybe I should try that, But here's my theory about this particular song. John was on the road. He was no virgin, that's for sure. None of the Beatles were. And women were throwing themselves at them. I heard a story that, I don't know how true it is, but like, when the Beatles were in their when you want to call dressing room, in their hovel to go down, they had to go down these stairs to the stage. Girls were waiting on the stage and were offering them blowjobs as they walked down, After a while, when you're that young, you might take them up on it, which might have made Cynthia a little bit antsy and insecure. And I think I Feel Fine was a conciliatory message. Like, I'm so glad that she's my little girl. Like he's talking about Cynthia. Like a little conciliatory message to her, as insincere as it might be. It might be a way of, well, I got to keep my wife happy, so I'm going to write this love song for her.
Yeah. Could be. The way Cynthia tells it, she never suspected that he was cheating like that.
Oh, she didn't? Wow.
Well, that's what she says anyway. She was naive.
She was naive. Well, it was a naive time, like the doors busted wide open after a point, but it was still a naive time early on like that. By the time you got to Yoko, though, the doors really were busted open, I do feel for Cynthia. I really do. I think she was a good woman and a good wife. It's just kind of sad, that he couldn't. And also for their kid, Julian.
Yeah.
Like, he really got the worst of it. And I'm sure he resented John for quite some time.
I can imagine. The best thing is that Julian and Sean are great friends now.
Yeah.
So that's good.
Yeah. That's really wonderful. It truly is. maybe that's a way of making some kind of closure, at least for him.
It's something. Some kind of harmony can exist in the world. And hey, speaking of the Beatles.
Yeah, it's funny. Sean keeps on steady with his songwriting, but I'm not quite sure what happened to Julian. Like, he kind of gave up on it.
I think he does photography now, or something.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, he does other pursuits as well.
I wonder if he felt initially like a pressure. Well, I'm a Beatles son. I should be a musician. You know.
You know, not to get into it, but this is what I feel. That I feel really bad for Sean because he will never be taken seriously. But literally, the thought occurred to me the other day, just out of the blue. Friendly Fire, which was Sean Lennon's solo album from, I think, 2006, is one of the greatest albums of the 21st century for me. I can go back to that album at any time. There's some really good songs on there, but no one will ever take him seriously as a songwriter. It's unfortunate.
Yeah. It is. It really is. That's the karma of
the poor billionaire son. You know. I guess I'm not crying myself to sleep about it, but
yeah.
Oh,
yeah. I mean,
plus all this weird Masonic stuff in his videos and stuff. Like, whatever kind of.
Yeah. Well, I'm friends with the director of Sean Lennon's videos, and the first one that came out was his first one with Sean. I forget what song it was, but he did this kind of like 8-bit digital thing. But he made references at the bottom. You'd see little references to the Illuminati. And I asked Rich about that. I said, are you a member of the club, Rich? You know? And he said, oh, no. He goes, you know, he's a hardcore non-believer in conspiracy theories. Like, he really is. Like the one that's really blatant, you know, with, I forget what song it was, but it's really blatant Masonic symbology and everything. It's filmed in a Masonic hall, right? I mentioned that one to Rich. Rich, what's going on with that? And he goes, yeah, we thought we'd poke at the conspiracy theorists. And his idea is that, you know how conspiracy theorists talk about how there's embedded imagery in movies and stuff like that. Some of it's pretty uncanny, actually. I've been like, whoa, that's weird. He says,
what day did Neo's passport expire in The Matrix again?
Yeah.
I forget. Look it up, folks. Look it up.
Was it 2001 too? 9/11 2001? Oh my God. Yeah, that's a little bizarro.
Yeah. It's something.
Proof we're living in a matrix.
And that was a interdimensional Stargate. Anyway.
Yeah. Right. What my buddy Rich said to me is that he goes, it doesn't make sense that directors would implant these images in movies. They don't have time to be concerned over stuff like that when they're busy trying to do all this other stuff. But who knows? I mean, an artist is in the club. One of the set designers is in the club.
Sure.
Hey, director, I think this image would be awesome right over here. What do you think?
Right.
Yeah. And nowadays, with all the conspiracy theory videos of like rap guys, like really out and out, looks like a ritual kind of, and it's a little creepy. It's a little creepy.
Yep. And I remember when all the auto-tune stuff was being normalized and the sort of transhumanist agenda marches in step with the increasing automation of music.
Yeah, you know what, man? I had the same exact thought. It was
They're
a way
to
of
make people sound like computers,
like robots. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that was actually going way back to the 80s because you can. There was an effect called the vocoder.
Right.
Vocoder.
Yep. Peter Gabriel used that? Question mark.
A lot of artists used it. Yeah.
Anyway, speaking of the Beatles,
yeah.
This is our podcast on I Feel Fine, folks.
Let's see, we're under an hour.
Yay!
If we end it right now, we'll be under an hour.
Okay,
we have
bye-bye,
30 more seconds. It feels like a New Year's Eve.
Okay, any final thoughts about the song?
I think I probably will after the podcast is put away, but right now
I have one more question for you. Just your own personal experience of the song. You were there when it was released and when you first heard it. Do you remember?
Not that particular one. I mean, I remember it as part of it's almost like part of a milieu,
Yeah.
like because Beatles songs were constantly being churned out then.
Yeah, that's true. Was it
but it's
released
not
as
one
a
of those,
single in America?
I don't know. I don't know. It might not have been, in which case that's why I'm not.
Right. Because as I say, 8 Days a Week did make it as a single in America, where it was not a
Right.
single in the UK.
Yeah, that would have to be looked into. I'm not quite sure. I'm willing to guess it was, but don't know for sure. There are a couple of Beatles songs that kind of bring me. They're like a time machine and bring me to a moment in my life. I Need You by George Harrison. I'm riding on my banana seat, butterfly handlebars bike, and I had a crush on this girl that lived around the block, Debbie Blackburn, and I used to ride my bike past her, and that song would be going through my head, and I'd be feeling all romantic at 12 years old or whatever.
I can see it.
Yeah, man, unless you were of age, like my age at that time, it's hard to understand that the Beatles were the soundtrack to your own life. They were the soundtrack of your life. They really were. And they took you through all the changes. It was just, it was spectacular. There's nothing like that will ever happen again. It was really blessed,
I take heart to this day. It's hard for me to go out and about in the world without hearing a Beatles song somewhere. And it's usually like the Muzak version of Long and Winding Road that I heard at the convenience store the other day. But there's always something.
You know what? I just saw a video pop up on my Facebook feed. Yes, I'm on Facebook. I'm embarrassed about that. But 9-year-old girl playing a Hofner bass to Penny Lane.
Cool.
And I had to repost it. I was like, you know what? Kids still love the Beatles. Yeah. Even today, kids love the Beatles. It's wonderful.
There you go. I feel fine.
So do I.
I will not let us go, even if it risks broaching the hour mark, without plugging your lessons. Because I know there is somebody out there who has been thinking about picking up the guitar or wants to extend their skills or even just wants to get into music theory more. And you are the man to do it. I can attest. Personal attestation. I would not be anywhere close to a musician if it wasn't for this man. I owe everything to him. Vinny, thank you. And tell people how they can get lessons from you.
I'm proud of you, James. I'm proud of all the progress you've made. You started out like a beginner intermediate, and now you've got a band and you're writing music. And you wrote music for one of your recent documentaries, which should be plugged as well. How Black Rock
conquered the world.
Conquered the world, yeah. Brilliant. It was brilliant. I teach. You know what we need to do is get our esteemed and wonderful video editor, Broc West, to take these last-minute plugs and put them in the beginning of the video. Because how many people get this
But
far?
the people who stay on to the end are the real core audience.
There you go. There you go. That's true. That's true.
That's the way I usually look at it.
It's funny. There's this new trend going on with podcasters. They'll say, all right, I want everybody to comment purple grass. They'll do it at the end of the video to see if they,
That's, I guess I may, But I often put important stuff at the end to see who's watching. And it's funny how many people aren't.
Yeah. I must say I'm a big fan, James, and I do watch till the end of your videos. I love the New World Next Week series very much too, by the way. But yeah, I do teach guitar. I teach online. I'm a theory junkie. I could teach you how to be a theory junkie. But I can also teach guitar techniques, songs, songwriting, how to compose music, the whole gamut pretty much, except for I'm not a good finger picker and I don't know classical on guitar. I love classical, and I'm a kind of a classical nerd, actually, but I don't do classical guitar. So thank you, James, for bringing that up. I always forget. God knows I'm a crappy businessman.
And what's your email or website, or what's the best way for people to contact you?
Yeah, that'd help. All right. So, you can find, actually, if you look in the About section of my YouTube channel, there's an AOL address, I think, an old Yahoo or AOL address on there. I just do still check that. But Vincognito, like incognito, it's very easy to remember. Yeah, vincognito.com is one. Vin, my YouTube is /Vincognito. Vincognito@gmail.com or earthlink.com, both Vincognito. So if you want to get in touch, do it that way.
Awesome. All right. We did it.
We did it, James. We killed it.
We should do another one.
Let's. All right. Good night, everybody. Really enjoyed it.